23rd May 1841. Denmark Strait. 1915 hours. Visibility approximately 600 meters. Fog banks drift across the water, reducing visibility further at irregular intervals. Sea state moderate. Wind northeast at approximately 25 knots. Air temperature 2 degrees Celsius. Water temperature 1 degree Celsius. HMS Suffolk, a county-class heavy cruiser, steams south through the strait. Her Type 279 radar sweeps continuously. Range approximately 13 miles in good conditions. In fog and ice, range degrades. The radar operator, Able Seaman Newell, watches the screen, mostly empty. Occasional returns from icebergs. Nothing significant. At 1922 hours, a new contact appears on the screen. Large, approximately 7 miles distant. Bearing 200 degrees. The contact is massive, much larger than an iceberg. Newell reports to the bridge immediately. Captain Robert Ellis orders speed increase to 30 knots. Suffolk turns to investigate while maintaining distance. The contact is Bismarck. Displacement approximately 50,000 tons. Length 251 meters. Armed with 8 380mm guns and 4 twin turrets. Accompanied by heavy cruiser Prince Eugen. Displacement 18,000 tons. Together, they represent the most powerful German surface force to enter the Atlantic. Suffolk has found them. Now she must track them without being destroyed. Her main armament, 8 8-inch guns, cannot seriously damage Bismarck. Her armor cannot withstand Bismarck's 15-inch guns. Her only advantages are radar and speed. She can see the German ships before they see her. She can run if they chase. That is all. Captain Ellis understands the mission. Shadow the German ships. Report their position continuously. Do not engage. Do not lose contact. Stay alive. For the next 31 hours, Suffolk and her sister ship Norfolk will execute this mission under conditions that test the limits of human endurance and mechanical reliability. If they fail, Bismarck escapes into the Atlantic. British convoys carrying food, fuel, and weapons from America will be hunted by the most powerful warship Germany has ever built. Hundreds of merchant ships could be sunk. Thousands of sailors could die. The Atlantic lifeline could be severed. Everything depends on 2 cruisers maintaining radar contact through fog, ice, and darkness against an enemy that can annihilate them if they get too close. To understand why Suffolk and Norfolk were in the Denmark Strait, you need to understand what Bismarck represented and why stopping her was critical. The Bismarck was commissioned in August 1940. She was the largest warship Germany had built since the Great War. Her design incorporated lessons from that conflict. Heavy armor, powerful guns, good speed. Her belt armor was 320 millimeters thick. Her turret faces were 360 millimeters. She could make approximately 30 knots. Her 8 15-inch guns could engage targets at ranges exceeding 35,000 meters. She had one mission: destroy British merchant shipping in the Atlantic. The British economy depended on imports. Food, oil, raw materials, weapons. All came by sea from America and the Empire. German U-boats were already sinking hundreds of thousands of tons monthly. If Bismarck entered the convoy lanes, she could sink ships faster than U-boats ever could. A single sortie might destroy dozens of merchantmen before British forces could intercept. The British understood this threat. When intelligence indicated Bismarck was preparing to sortie, the Royal Navy mobilized everything available. Battleships Hood and Prince of Wales were sent to intercept. Cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk were positioned in Denmark Strait to detect any breakout attempt. Additional forces were readied throughout the Atlantic. Denmark Strait is the passage between Iceland and Greenland, width approximately 300 kilometers at the narrowest point. In May 1941, ice extended from the Greenland coast approximately 100 kilometers into the strait. This reduced the navigable width to approximately 200 kilometers. German ships attempting to reach the Atlantic had to pass through this gap. The British divided the patrol area. Suffolk would patrol the ice edge on the Greenland side. Norfolk would patrol the Iceland side. Between them, they should detect any German ships passing through. Should detect. But the weather was terrible. Fog was constant. Ice and icebergs created radar clutter. The Germans might slip through unseen. Captain Ellis on Suffolk and Captain Alfred Phillips on Norfolk understood the stakes. They had inadequate force to fight Bismarck, but they had radar. Suffolk's Type 279 set was newer, more reliable. Norfolk's Type 286 was older, less capable, but both could detect large ships at ranges beyond visual contact. In fog, this was decisive advantage. The cruisers maintained patrol for days. Nothing appeared. The strain was considerable. Constant vigilance in freezing weather. Radar operators staring at screens for hour after hour. Bridge officers scanning the fog. Everyone knowing that missing Bismarck meant disaster. On 23 May at approximately 1900 hours, Suffolk's radar detected contacts consistent with large ships. Ellis ordered investigation while maintaining safe distance. At 1922 hours, the contact resolved. 2 large warships, approximately 7 miles distant. Suffolk turned away, increasing distance while maintaining radar contact. Ellis transmitted contact report immediately. Position, course, speed, composition. The message went to Norfolk, to British Home Fleet headquarters, to all forces. The German ships had been found. Now they had to be tracked until heavier British units could intercept. Norfolk was approximately 15 miles southwest of Suffolk. Captain Phillips received the contact report and turned to intercept. His radar had not detected the German ships yet. He relied on Suffolk's position data. At 1950 hours, Norfolk emerged from a fog bank directly into visual range of Bismarck and Prince Eugen. Distance was approximately 6 miles. Norfolk was in perfect firing position for Bismarck's guns. Phillips ordered emergency turn. Maximum speed. Norfolk swung hard to port, making smoke. Bismarck opened fire. The first salvo straddled Norfolk, shells landing close on both sides. Water columns rose 30 meters. The second salvo was short. Norfolk disappeared into the fog bank before the third salvo arrived. No hits, but it was close. If Bismarck's gunnery had been slightly better, if Norfolk had been slightly slower, if the fog had been clearer, Norfolk would have been crippled or sunk. Phillips had nearly lost his ship in the opening seconds of contact. Both cruisers now had visual and radar contact. They began the shadow dance that would define the next day and a half. Maintain contact at maximum range. Report position every 30 minutes. Stay beyond effective gunnery range. If the Germans turned toward them, run. If the Germans turned away, close up. Never lose contact. The conditions were brutal. Temperature remained near freezing. Ice accumulated on ships, adding weight, reducing stability. Crew chipped ice continuously to prevent capsizing. The fog came and went unpredictably. Visibility ranged from 600 meters to perhaps 5 kilometers in clear patches. Radar was critical. In fog, the cruisers could not see Bismarck. They relied entirely on radar returns. But radar in 1941 was primitive. The sets were unreliable. They required constant adjustment. The operators had to distinguish real contacts from ice, from weather, from equipment malfunctions. Able Seaman Newell on Suffolk maintained radar contact for hours. He watched the screen, tracking the 2 large returns that represented Bismarck and Prince Eugen. When the returns faded, he adjusted settings, tuned the equipment, brought them back. When ice clutter obscured the contacts, he filtered it out. He did this continuously, hour after hour, knowing that if he lost contact even briefly, the Germans might escape. On Norfolk, the radar operators had harder task. Their equipment was less capable. They lost contact repeatedly. Each time, they had to rely on Suffolk's reports to reacquire. Phillips found this intolerable. His ship was blind in fog while Suffolk could see. But there was nothing to do except trust Suffolk and maintain best possible position. At 2200 hours, Bismarck and Prince Eugen altered course. They turned slightly west, closer to the ice edge. Suffolk and Norfolk adjusted, maintaining distance. The German ships were clearly aware they were being tracked. They were trying to lose the cruisers. But radar made that impossible. As long as Suffolk's equipment worked, the Germans were visible. The night was polar twilight, never fully dark. The sky remained gray. Visibility poor but not zero. The cruisers maintained visual watches. But in practice, radar was the only reliable means of detection. Officers rotated through watch, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. Crew slept at action stations when possible. Everyone was exhausted within hours, but the tracking continued. At 0200 hours on 24th May, Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland aboard Hood made contact with the German ships. Hood and Prince of Wales had raced north through the night, guided by Suffolk's position reports. They engaged Bismarck at 0553 hours. The Battle of Denmark Strait lasted approximately 20 minutes. Hood exploded at 0600 hours. hit in the magazine by Bismarck's fifth salvo. She sank in less than 3 minutes. 1,415 men died. 3 survived. Prince of Wales was damaged and withdrew. Suffolk and Norfolk watched from distance. They could see the gunfire, the explosions, the sudden absence where Hood had been. Phillips on Norfolk wanted to engage, support the British battleships. Ellis on Suffolk reminded him of orders. Shadow. Report. Do not engage. Their mission was tracking, not fighting. Hood's destruction was catastrophic. The most famous British warship sunk in minutes, but Bismarck had also been damaged. Prince of Wales had hit her with 3 14-inch shells. One penetrated a fuel tank, causing oil leak. Another damaged her bow, reducing speed. The damage was not crippling, but it was significant. More importantly, the British now knew exactly where Bismarck was. Suffolk and Norfolk continued tracking. Additional British forces converged. Battleships King George V and Rodney, carrier Victorious, cruisers from Gibraltar. The net was closing, but only if Suffolk and Norfolk maintained contact. The tracking continued through 24th May. Bismarck steamed south at approximately 28 knots. The oil leak worsened. She left a visible slick on the water. Her speed decreased slightly. Suffolk and Norfolk followed, maintaining approximately 15-mile distance. They reported position every 30 minutes. The British forces used these reports to intercept. At 2230 hours on 24th May, aircraft from carrier Victorious attacked Bismarck. The attack achieved 1 torpedo hit, ineffective against Bismarck's armor, but the attack demonstrated that British forces were closing in. Bismarck's commander, Admiral Günther Lütjens, understood his situation was deteriorating. At 0300 hours on 25th May, Bismarck executed a deception maneuver. She turned directly toward Suffolk. The range decreased rapidly. Suffolk turned away, running at maximum speed. Bismarck followed briefly, then turned south again. But the turn was sharper than expected. Bismarck swung completely around, heading southeast at high speed. Suffolk lost radar contact. The sudden turn, combined with equipment limitations and operator fatigue, meant the contact disappeared from the scope. Newell searched desperately, adjusting settings, scanning different ranges. Nothing. Norfolk also lost contact. Both cruisers searched for hours. No radar returns. No visual sighting. Bismarck had vanished. This was disaster. After 31 hours of continuous tracking, the Germans had escaped. British forces converging on Bismarck's last reported position found empty ocean. The search expanded, covering thousands of square kilometers. Aircraft searched. Ships searched. Nothing. For 26 hours, Bismarck was lost. The tracking operation had failed. Suffolk and Norfolk had done everything correctly for over a day, then lost contact at the critical moment. The crew was devastated. They had failed. Bismarck would escape, reach France, repair, and sortie again. But Bismarck's fate was already sealed, not because of Suffolk and Norfolk, but because of German mistakes. At 0900 hours on 25th May, Admiral Lütjens transmitted a long radio message to German headquarters. He reported the battle, Hood's destruction, his own damage, his intentions. The message was long enough for British direction-finding stations to locate him. The position fix was approximate but sufficient. British forces adjusted search patterns. At 10:30 hours on 26th May, a Catalina flying boat spotted Bismarck. The tracking resumed, but now with aircraft and ships, not just Suffolk and Norfolk. The cruisers were released from tracking duty on 26th May. They had maintained contact for over 30 hours under terrible conditions. They had guided Hood and Prince of Wales to intercept. They had provided continuous position data that allowed British forces to converge. When they lost contact, it was due to equipment limitations and human exhaustion, not failure of effort. Captain Ellis received a message from Admiral John Tovey, commander of Home Fleet. Well done, Suffolk. Your tracking made all subsequent operations possible. Similar message went to Norfolk. The recognition was genuine. Without the cruisers, Bismarck would have entered the Atlantic untracked. The entire hunting operation would have been impossible. Bismarck was sunk 27th May by battleships King George V and Rodney, after torpedo damage from aircraft crippled her steering. She went down approximately 400 miles west of Brest. Approximately 2,000 men died. 115 were rescued. The most powerful German warship ever built lasted 9 days on her first combat sortie. Suffolk and Norfolk returned to Scapa Flow. The crew was exhausted, Radar operators had worked continuous shifts for over 30 hours. Bridge officers had maintained watch through freezing weather and constant stress. The entire ship's company had functioned at maximum capacity for days. The recognition they received was modest. A message of thanks. Mention in dispatches. No medals. No public celebration. Their contribution was technical, unglamorous. Tracking ships with radar was not heroic in the conventional sense. It was tedious, stressful, difficult work requiring concentration and endurance, but it was critical. Without Suffolk's initial contact at 1922 hours on 23rd May, Bismarck would have passed through Denmark Strait undetected. Without 31 hours of continuous tracking, British forces could not have intercepted. Without the position reports every 30 minutes, Hood and Prince of Wales could not have found their target. The entire Bismarck operation, from initial detection to final sinking, depended on Suffolk and Norfolk doing their job correctly under terrible conditions. They did. They maintained contact when losing it would have meant disaster. They stayed alive when Bismarck could have destroyed them. They provided the intelligence that made everything else possible. The human cost was not measured in casualties. Both cruisers survived without serious damage. The cost was exhaustion, stress, and the knowledge that any mistake would have consequences far beyond their individual ships. Newell watching his radar screen for hours, knowing that if he lost the contact, Bismarck escaped. Ellis making decisions about distance and position, knowing that too close meant destruction. Too far meant losing contact. These men were not heroes in the traditional sense. They did not charge into battle. They did not perform extraordinary acts of courage. They did their jobs under difficult conditions. They maintained discipline and focus when exhaustion and fear urged them to fail. This is a different kind of courage, not the courage of one dramatic moment, but the courage of sustained performance under stress, the courage to keep watching the radar screen when your eyes hurt and your head aches, the courage to maintain position when you know one mistake brings death, the courage to continue when everything in you wants to rest. Suffolk's radar operators maintained watch in shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, for over 30 hours, in freezing conditions, in a steel box below decks, staring at a primitive screen. The technology was unreliable. It required constant adjustment. The operators had to distinguish genuine contacts from equipment malfunctions, ice returns, weather clutter. Able Seaman Newell later described the experience in an interview. He said the hardest part was not the initial contact, but the hours afterward. Maintaining concentration. Trusting that the blip on the screen was really Bismarck and not equipment error. Adjusting settings when the contact faded. Never being certain. Always doubting. But continuing anyway. This uncertainty characterized the entire operation. The cruisers never knew for certain they had the right contacts. The radar returns could have been other ships. Visual identification was impossible in fog. They operated on inference and probability. Those two large contacts moving together were almost certainly Bismarck and Prince Eugen. Almost certainly. If they were wrong, they were tracking the wrong ships. Bismarck would escape while they followed false contacts. The entire British response would be misdirected. But they could not verify. They had to trust their assessment and continue. Phillips on Norfolk faced additional challenge. His radar was less capable than Suffolk's. He frequently lost contact. Each time, he had to decide. Trust Suffolk's reports and maintain position based on her data, or conduct independent search, risking losing both ships. He chose to trust Suffolk. This required subordinating his own judgment to another captain's information. For a ship commander, this is psychologically difficult, but it was correct decision. The coordination between the two cruisers was critical. They maintained communication continuously. Position reports, contact updates, tactical assessments. They adjusted their positions to cover maximum search area while ensuring at least one ship maintained contact. When Norfolk lost radar contact, Suffolk maintained it. When Suffolk had to turn away from German fire, Norfolk positioned to regain contact. This coordination was not automatic. It required constant communication, mutual trust, and shared understanding of mission priorities. Both captains understood that their individual survival was secondary to maintaining contact. If one ship had to risk destruction to keep tracking Bismarck, there was acceptable cost. Neither ship had to make that sacrifice, but the willingness was present. Ellis and Phillips both understood that losing Bismarck was unacceptable. Better to die trying to maintain contact than to live having let the Germans escape. After the operation, naval analysts studied the tracking phase. They identified multiple moments when contact could have been lost, equipment failures that were overcome, tactical decisions that could have gone wrong, weather conditions that almost prevented detection. The operation succeeded despite multiple failure points. The conclusion was that Suffolk and Norfolk had performed exceptionally, but also that the operation depended too heavily on fragile technology and exhausted crews. Radar was critical but unreliable. Operators were skilled but human. The margin for error was too small. Changes were implemented. Better radar sets, more operators per shift, improved training, standardized procedures for tracking operations. The lessons from Suffolk and Norfolk's 31 hours in Denmark Strait improved Royal Navy tracking capabilities for the rest of the war. But in May 1941, those improvements did not exist. Suffolk and Norfolk operated with the equipment and procedures available. They succeeded through skill, endurance, and considerable luck. If Newell had been slightly less capable, if the radar had failed at critical moment, if the fog had been thicker, if the Germans had made different tactical choices, any of these variables could have changed the outcome. The operation's success was not inevitable. It was achieved through human effort against difficult odds. This makes it more impressive, not less. Suffolk and Norfolk were not invincible. They were vulnerable cruisers with primitive technology facing a vastly superior enemy. They succeeded anyway. After the war, when the Bismarck story was told and retold, the focus was always on the dramatic moments. Hood's explosion, the final battle, Bismarck sinking beneath the waves. Suffolk and Norfolk's contribution was mentioned but not emphasized. Tracking ships with radar was not dramatic. It was technical, unglamorous work. But without that work, none of the dramatic moments happen. Hood and Prince of Wales never find Bismarck. The British forces never converge. Bismarck escapes into the Atlantic and begins hunting convoys. The war in the Atlantic takes a different trajectory. Everything depended on two cruisers maintaining contact through fog and ice for 31 hours. They did it. The rest followed from that success. Newell, the radar operator who made first contact, remained in the Royal Navy through the war. He participated in multiple operations. He received no special recognition for his role in tracking Bismarck. In his service record, it was one operation among many. Years later, historians researching the Bismarck chase interviewed him. He described the operation matter-of-factly. He had watched his screen, reported contacts, done his job. Nothing extraordinary. This modesty was characteristic of the crew. They did not consider themselves heroes. They had performed their assigned duties under difficult conditions. That was all. The recognition and glory should go to those who fought the battles, who died on Hood, who sank Bismarck. The tracking was just preparation. But preparation is what enables action. Intelligence is what makes strategy possible. The unglamorous work of watching radar screens and reporting positions created the conditions for everything else. History should remember this. Suffolk and Norfolk were the eyes in the fog. Without them, the Bismarck hunt fails. Without that first contact at 1922 hours on 23rd May, the entire operation never happens. Without 31 hours of continuous tracking, British forces cannot converge. The cruisers did not sink Bismarck, but they made it possible. They found her. They held her. They guided the hunters to their target. When they lost contact, others continued the chase. But those first critical hours, when Bismarck could have disappeared forever, Suffolk and Norfolk were all that stood between success and failure. They held through fog, ice, exhaustion, and fear. They maintained contact when losing it would have been easy and understandable. They stayed alive when dying would have been simple. For 31 hours in May 1941, two heavy cruisers and their exhausted crews were the most important ships in the Royal Navy. Everything depended on them. They performed, the rest is history. But the real story is not the dramatic hunt and kill. The real story is the radar operators watching screens, the bridge officers making positioning decisions, the captains balancing risk and mission, the crews enduring freezing weather and constant tension, the sustained excellence over 31 hours that made everything else possible. That is the story of HMS Norfolk and Suffolk, the eyes in the fog, the ships that would not let go, the forgotten foundation of the most famous naval chase in history. Without them, Bismarck vanishes. With them, she dies. That is the entire difference. That is why they matter. History remembers the kill. It should also remember the track.